Walter has been working with us for many, many years, helping us keep our donkeys' feet healthy, and and they all approve.
Cheerleading section.
Yeah, I bet. Nancy saying, and I approve this message. So anyway, I asked Walter if he could give people some tips on how to keep their donkeys' feet healthy and what to look for when they're looking at feet, if that a problem might be surfacing. So Giselle is being a very nice girl and letting him work very nicely, and we'll take a look at that foot. Nice close look at that foot. So would you call that a healthy foot, Walter?
Yes, I would.
So would you describe some of the different parts?
Well, what you've got on a typical foot is you've got the frog back here. And you've got the sole of the foot here. This yellow line is actually the white line. That's the lamina that holds the hoof wall to the coffin bone in the foot. And then the outer part is the hoof wall. And they do have a little bit of, black stuff in here. They're going to have that. It's normal to be in a foot. So as long as it's not eating into the foot too deep, it's nothing to really worry about. One of the reasons we trim the feet is to clean them up and expose a lot of that to air. Just by exposing it to air, a lot of it will go away and keep it to a dull roar to where it doesn't work its way into the foot where you end up with an abscess or any kind of problems. But the main two reasons that you trim feet are for hygiene purposes, to clean all the goop out and the dead material, and to balance the feet, to bring them back in balance. So
when you say balance, what are you referring to in balance?
Ideally, you want an animal to land flat and level on his feet when he walks. But due to conformation and other things, they usually don't land evenly. And as the feet grow, they get to where they grow either forward, or they get a club foot, or they grow where they're landing on the inside of the foot or the outside of the foot. They start landing on it unevenly. And so when we're bringing balance back to the foot, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get them to where they land evenly instead of one side or the other side, or at the toe or at the heel. And when we do that, it actually helps the foot, because the lamina, the white line that we were talking about, that yellow line, is it's holding the hoof wall to the coffin bone in the foot throughout. And when you land on one side of the foot, that means all the weight of the animal is being focused in part of the foot instead of the whole foot. So the more you can get everything lined out to where he's landing evenly, then you're going to make those concussion forces spread throughout the entire foot instead of just part of the foot, which makes it where you'll have less lameness issues. You'll just have less problems in general. Granted, donkeys don't have as many problems typically as horses do with their feet.
How does their frog differ from a horse's frog?
Well, the biggest difference is the frog itself, and the way it functions is the same as a horse. The biggest difference is the frog on a donkey a lot of times is a little more behind the foot than in a horse. You've noticed where the line is here. This is the frog here, and the heel starts up here. So there's actually behind the foot, whereas a horse, it's usually encapsulated into the foot. If this was a horse foot, this wall would come all the way around to behind the frog. So that's the main difference. As far as the way it functions, it still wants to function the same way. It helps push blood back up the leg. It acts as a concussion absorption.
It's actually part of the circulation system.
It's part of the circulation system of the animal.
But for the donkeys, that extra frog is what gives them gripping power and
Yes.
makes them such athletic animals when they're climbing and going through mountains and stuff like that.
Right. So the frog is very important. Matter of fact, when you're finding balance in a foot, that's what I use to find the center of the foot. You got to clean the frog up to where you have a healthy frog, which you view where the frog should be and what it should be, and then you trim the foot around the frog to find the balance in the foot. And that's what I use as my gauge to find balance. Mainly is the frog. A lot of people, you can look at the top of the leg, but if you learn to read the frog well, you can trim it without even looking at the leg, and when you're done, it's all going to line up.
Now, something that's noteworthy, and of course you don't even pay attention to it because you do it all the time, is that you work on your knees, and that also you always cross-tie donkeys into something flat. Can you explain why you do that?
Well, the reason I work on my knees is it makes it easier for the animal. I'm not doing it because it's easier for me. But if I'm standing up and I'm trying to hold this animal and bring it up to where I can work on it like a typical horse, now he can't, it's harder for him. Whereas if I can just sit here on my knees and barely pick this foot up and hold it real relaxed, it's easy for them.
And they don't fight you as much.
And they don't fight as much. Once they learn that, oh man, he's not doing anything, this is a piece of cake, they usually get better for it. So the main reason I do on my knees, if I was standing up and someone would grab my leg and start pulling it a certain way, and the next thing I know I'm having to hop, well, that's what we do with a lot, especially the smaller animals. It's the same thing on miniature horses. I get on my knees for miniature horses and smaller animals. I don't get on my knees depending on the height of the animal.
And if they're fighting with you a lot, too.
And if they're fighting with me. I cross-tie donkeys into a fence because it limits their mobility. So what happens if you only have one tie and I've got this foot up, he may want to try to jump over me. And he can. But if he turns this way when I'm down here and tries to jump, he can't because that rope limits him. That's the other side, the same thing. He can't do it. Now, I do not do this with horses. Horses will thrash around and hurt themselves if you try to cross time into a fence. But donkeys are smarter than that. Typically, and the other thing about a donkey, once they realize usually that they're not making any progress, they'll just stop. And by cross tying, I even cross tie most of my good ones just because it's just easier. As soon as you do it, they just like, okay, I'm here to have my feet done. They stand around, la-di-da, it's no big deal. You undo them, give them a treat, and go on. And it's easy, and it keeps anybody from getting hurt, keeps the animal from getting hurt. The biggest mistake I see amateurs doing with tying in general is everybody wants to have this long lead rope, and that's the worst thing you can do. You want to have them short into something because you've got a long lead rope. They have more power when they set back or pull back. They got all that weight, that distance they can go. If they're close, they can't really get so much pull on it. And the other thing is they can't get their legs over it if it's short. You'll have an animal get hurt more the longer you time rather than the shorter you time. But for some reason, amateurs typically want to leave a long rope going to the halter, and that's where you have more problems. He's going to have more chance of hurting his neck, his legs. It's just safer to tie them, what we call snub them up. Snub them up tight where they limit their mobility, then nobody can get hurt.
And they stop, they relax, and they give in.
And they give in.
Yeah, if you have just one rope, though, they've got all that room to swing, and they still think they've got an out, and they will fight you.
Yep. So.
And she's doing a great job, and Giselle is not one of our more disciplined donkeys, so this is actually kind of a big deal.
So you can see her worrying right there a little bit just when I come forward. And what you've got to do with animals, with donkeys or horses, is you've got to have the patience. What I like to do before, especially something that doesn't know me very well or is nervous, what you want to do is you want to come over and touch them. See how she just moves away. But don't just go up and grab a foot. Touch them.
And not on the face either.
And no, stay off their faces. They don't want to be coddled. They're not coddled normally, not in their natural scheme of things. So what you want to do is you want to touch them and let your hand come down a couple times. Stop, do it again, and then stop, hesitate. Now what I do is I try to roll the toe over a little bit and let them get into relax and then pick it up. So it's a series of things. And it seems like it's not necessary, but those subtle little differences make all the difference. If you just run over and grab an animal's leg and try to pick it up, he's going to fight you a lot of times unless he's really broke and he doesn't, because he doesn't know what's going on. I do the same thing when I pull him forward. I almost always start by touching an animal up high, and I'm just barely lightly lift my fingers just so they're aware of where I'm at, so I don't just spook them by touching them. And what I'll do the same thing on coming forward is I'll try to just rock that knee and let him stand onto their toe. Now he didn't want to do it, so he came up, so I go here, and now I'm just going to let him rest on my leg.
And this is usually the thing that they fight the most. They don't really like having that.
They don't like you coming forward with their foot normally. It does take a little training usually. But I like to always kind of clean up the front of the foot a little bit. There's no breaks. This is a good foot. There's nothing to really worry with here, so all we're doing is doing this to round the edges. And ideally, when the foot is trimmed, you want to look at the hairline. You want to just go down from the hairline kind of like a pyramid and be a little wider at the ground surface than it is at the hairline. So what we're doing here is we're just finding the shape of the hairline should be the shape of the foot.
She does have a pretty foot.
Yeah, she's got a real pretty foot. And if there was a lot of if there were indentures in here or a lot of bad ridges, I would rasp them to smooth them up. But ideally, you really don't want to damage the top of the hoof if you don't have to, because it maintains moisture. When you scrape it, which a lot of people do just to make it cosmetically look better, sometimes I think it weakens the integrity of the hoof. So ideally, if you don't need to do it, I stay off the top of the hoof. But I do round my edges because it helps with cracks, and it just seems that the feet stay together better longer that way.
Yeah, we've noticed sometimes when we've had farriers that didn't quite file off enough that the feet get a little bit. Yes, Nancy? The feet start to peel a little bit and flake.
Yep.
And the trim doesn't last as long, you know?
The other thing I like to do, which is, depending on how you've been taught, might differ if you've ever read things. But normally what I like to do is I like to leave as much sole on a trim foot inside the white line as what I've got on hoof wall outside. A lot of people will tell you to trim all the sole away to the white line to where it doesn't bear any weight. But when you do that, you're going to find your hoof wall splitting up a lot sooner. And so I like to leave a little bit of flat surface on the inside of the white line as well as hoof wall on the outside of the white line.
That's a beautiful foot, Walter.
Yeah.
Well done.
And then I use ictamol. I put a little ictamol in there. I think it helps with white line disease. Nothing can live in it. So if you got some of that black stuff, I think it kills. I don't do these animals that regular, so it's not like it's going to solve the world problems because it's being done once and it won't be done again for several months maybe. But it kills what it touches right now. So I have found it's like a little medicine in the foot. Every time you trim them is a good thing. I used to have a lot of animals in East Texas that I did that had bad white line disease problems. And when I started doing the ictamol when I trim them, it seemed like their feet got better than when I didn't. So I just do it because it's better than not doing it. And this stuff is non-caustic. I've gone through periods where I used iodine. This is a drawing salve, also known as ictamol. But you can use it on abscesses and whatnot. But I've used iodine. It'll kill. Clorox will kill. But I can't use iodine because after 3 or 4 days of using iodine, my fingers burn. It hurts. It's caustic, and you don't want to get it on their hairline. Clorox is the same way. I look like I'm wearing tie-dye if I'm using Clorox. I ruin all my clothes. You get Clorox on everything, and it's too caustic to put on yourself daily. This stuff is not caustic, and it works. So that's what I've been using probably for 15 years. I've been doing that now. Almost all my donkeys, unless they're in a real arid environment, I almost religiously put ictamol on every foot that I trim just because I think it helps. It makes me happy, and the animals do seem do better with it.
And we manage to do pretty well if we just have them done every couple months here. So we do have sandy soil, so we can't go more than that. But
same thing when I'm going to pick up a hind leg. I'm going to touch them on the withers first. I don't just go over and grab this animal's leg and then lightly. I know you can't on the video tell, but I'm lightly just letting it know where I'm going. And I'll go see how he moved a little bit. I'm just barely touching. It's not hard. I'll run my hand if I'm not sure he's going to kick, and I'll just let him get that feel so it's not a surprise. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide down here and I'm going to pull it forward. So if he kicks, it's not going to kick me. And then I'm going to walk out behind. That way nobody gets hurt. And here you see the frog is overgrown. You got crud in there, there's black in there. This is an overgrown foot. This is not a terribly overgrown foot, but this is actually where, about as long as I like to see them if you're wanting to keep your animals really healthy when you do a trim. You're not letting it get bad and then trying to fix it and then letting it get bad and trying to fix it. You're just keeping it good all the time.
Right. Keeping a nice healthy hoof.
Right. So the frog will overgrow these commissure areas here, and it'll hold stuff up in there. See, now she doesn't have that much patience. She's ready for me to stop. So I'm going to stop a minute and start again. I'm just going to trim rather than talk because this is too much talk for her.
Okay. And I've got I think you've given people a good start, Walter, and I appreciate your doing that. Thank you.